Okay, we're live.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Howard University School of Divinity's weekly chapel service. This semester, we will be featuring ministers and pastors from across the country as a part of our Answering the Call series, the first 5 years. This semester, we'll be featuring pastors who are in their first 5 years of ministry serving in senior leadership, who will be giving our students and our community insight and a deeper glance into what it's like to be a senior pastor in the country today in their first 5 years. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to our dean, Dr. Yolanda Pierce, for just some opening words and an opening prayer.
Thank you so much, Reverend Peterman. Hello, everyone. I see your names. I see a few of you on the gallery. It is always good to see you all, even virtually. I simply wanted to welcome our guests. I wanted to welcome all of you to this series that we're calling the first 5 years. And I want to tell you that it really is an exciting time to be in theological education. And so part of the reason why we're doing the first 5 years is because this is about praxis, okay? This is about all of the tools, all of the knowledge that many of you are gaining while you are in theological education. And then what is going to happen on the other end of that when you leave these halls, when you leave the halls of your school and you enter into leadership. And so this series is praxis, where theological education is meeting the reality of being a servant and a leader. So we are thankful for all of these clergy and members of the ministry who will be sharing with us over the next few weeks their experiences in their first 5 years. Those first 5 years are everything. As someone who is finishing up her third year as dean here at HUSD, I can tell you I'm learning more in these 3 years, these first few years, than I'll probably learn in a lifetime. So thank you for being here tonight. We welcome our guests. Thanks so much, Reverend Peterman, for hosting tonight. And we're just going to begin with a word of prayer. God, we are thankful to you for this beloved community. We are thankful for this conversation. We are thankful because you have called each of us by name to be servants, to be leaders, to be followers of you, oh God. Bless this conversation. May it enrich each and every person who is present here tonight. Amen.
Thank you, Dean Pierce, for that wonderful opening prayer. At this time, it's my honor to introduce our first two panelists in the series. I'm excited to have these two individuals with us at the Howard University School of Divinity this evening. One of the blessings of being virtual is that our community this semester is getting to hear from a number of different speakers whom live all across the country, who we probably would not have had a chance to hear from on a normal Wednesday night. But we're blessed tonight to begin with two dynamic senior pastors, two dynamic leaders and prophetic pulpiteers who are going to give us some insight tonight on candidating and pastoral transition. Our first guest this evening is none other than the Reverend Dr. Kimberly Credit, who serves as the first female and seventh pastor at the Mount Zion Baptist Church in Boonton Township, New Jersey. She was elected as pastor in 2015 with 95% of the vote. I'm sure she'll get into that tonight. And prior to that, she served at Mount Zion as their interim pastor. Dr. Credit directs the Doctor of Ministry cohort for Transformational Preaching at Payne Theological Seminary in Wilberforce, Ohio. And she received her Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from the William Patterson University, her Master of Divinity, and her Doctor of Ministry degrees, both from the New York Theological Seminary. Her Doctor of Ministry dissertation homiletic and Christian apologetics. Dr. Credit is with us this evening. And in addition to Dr. Credit, we also have with us a son of Howard University who is returning home to be with us, the Reverend Dr. Joshua L. Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell is the seventh senior pastor of the historic 31st Street Baptist Church in Richmond, Virginia, and is a native of Baltimore, Maryland. Dr. Mitchell is a proud alumnus of our beloved Howard University, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in communication and is a two-time graduate of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University, where he earned both his Master of Divinity and Doctor of Ministry degree. Dr. Mitchell is a sought-out preacher, teacher, consultant, and writer, and is the recent author of the groundbreaking Judson Press release text entitled Black Millennials in the Church, Meet Me Where I Am. Might I also add that he is a member of the greatest fraternity on earth, that is the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. So we want to welcome Dr. Credit to the Howard University School of Divinity, and we also want to welcome home our beloved brother, the Reverend Dr. Joshua L. Mitchell. Are you both here? Can I see you? I think this is on speaker view now.
Here.
Here we are. Okay, we are here. I'm going to start off with you, Dr. Credit. If you would just talk to our students and to our community to this evening and just tell us about your journey to the senior pastorate. What did that journey look like for you, and that journey to the Mount Zion Baptist Church there in Boonton, New Jersey?
Sure. Again, I want to just thank you, Dr. Pierce and Reverend Peterman, for the invitation to share on this evening. Had a very interesting journey to becoming the senior pastor at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Boonton Township. As already read in my short bio, I came to Mount Zion as an interim pastor. And typically, if you don't know, when you come to a church as an interim pastor, what happens is that you end up signing a contract that eliminates you from applying as the permanent or senior pastor. And so because at that time I was an associate minister, I traveled beyond New Jersey, but particularly in New Jersey around Baptist churches, doing a lot of their training for leaders and associations and state conventions. And so I was well known for that. So really when Mount Zion wanted me to come preach and considered me for an interim pastor, it was because of my leadership skills. They wanted me to come in and get things together, but they did not want me as their pastor at the time. And so I remember the day signing the paper of the contract that eliminated me. And I remember saying, God, I know that you've called me to this church, in short. And but I signed the papers nonetheless, and began serving as the interim. I remember sitting in the pulpit one day as they were going through the candidating process, and they read off the survey results from the mainstream congregation as to what they were looking for in a pastor. And I will never forget these three things. I mean, sitting there, I was totally read because they read off one, that they typically did not want a pastor that was under the age of 40. They did not want a pastor that was a woman, and they did not want a pastor that was unmarried. And I was all three of those things. And I'm thinking to myself, oh boy, this is going to be something. Speed things up. During the 4th month of serving them as their interim, the leaders in the church had got together and prayed and fasted, and they called a business meeting, which I knew nothing about. They called a business meeting in that 4th month to reverse the vote to allow me to become one of the candidates for the vacancy as a senior pastor. And so I was thrilled with that, and it just attested to what I knew God told me, and how I had already fallen in love with them and knew that I was supposed to be their pastor. And so we went through the process. I'm going to tell you something as an interim, because this is a little unique. Most people will not be the interim pastor before they become the senior pastor. And oftentimes when you are the interim pastor, there's a large chance that you will not be selected as the pastor, even if they do allow you to apply. For whatever reason, I don't know, many of pastors have gotten their hearts broken because of that. And so it was, I'll tell you this last part, it was very hard being the interim while watching them go through the process. It's like falling in love with someone, spending time with someone, and watching them still open themselves up to other lovers. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And so that's how it felt. I would literally be at the church, although they the candidacy process and instructions were for applicants to send their resumes to the PO box. But instead, we don't like to read. And so I would be in the office, like preparing for Bible study or whatever, and they would actually, like, resumes would be coming in. And I remember I would always like close my eyes not to look at look at who's applying. It was hard sometimes. You see friends applying for the same church that you're interested in and you're at serving. So that was my journey. It was very hard. However, at the end of, I served about close to 10 months as the interim, and they decided at once they had their three final candidates, they called for the vote, and this church that said they did not want anyone under 40, unmarried, or a woman. 95, and I say 95%, but it was really more than that. But over 95% voted me in as pastor, and I think they would still vote the same today. I pray.
That's an interesting journey, and we're going to get to, we actually have a week dedicated to what it's like to be an interim pastor. So you kind of foreshadow for us a little bit in telling us your story. Dr. Mitchell, you are the new pastor of the 31st Street Baptist Church in Richmond, Virginia, called to that church in the middle of the pandemic, at the very beginning, I believe, correct?
Very beginning.
At the very beginning, after serving so diligently at the Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church in Houston, Texas. Tell us about your journey to the pastorate, but also give us some insight on the application process and what that looked like, and what we should what our students and what our community should be thinking about when considering applying to be a senior pastor.
Okay, that's a lot. I'm gonna try to make sure I hit all of it. First of all, let me thank.
And I love your shirt, man.
Hey, man, we're trying down here at 31st Street. But let me thank Dean Pierce. Let me thank Reverend Peterman and all of those who are responsible for me being here. I jumped at the opportunity to be a part of this conversation because I owe a debt to Howard University. It is the place where I went for undergrad and learned many of the skills that are helping me to navigate this period of pandemic. In the middle of my first year of the pastorate, I got those skills as a communication major at Howard University. And I also got my beautiful wife who's been riding with me at Howard University. So I'm grateful to be a part of this conversation today. I think that my journey to the pastorate probably begins with my home church. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, but my church home is in Washington, D.C. It's actually in Northeast Rising Sun Baptist Church, 3126 South Dakota Avenue, Washington, D.C., 20018, where the Reverend Marlo L. Mitchell is my pastor, and grew up as a church kid, son of the pastor, before then, son of the chair of the deacon board. And I say that that's a part of my journey because I learned a lot about worship and picked up on skills in my development at my home church. We had a membership, and I tell people, I feel like I've been a part of every kind of church with every size membership and every kind of location. And so my home church is in the city, Northeast DC, 50 to 100 members. And I got to do everything. I got to play the drums. I got to lead worship. I got to preach. I was licensed there. I was ordained there. And so a lot of the skills that were later polished in some of the spaces that people interacted with me later were actually developed in my home church. And so it starts there. When I went to seminary here at Virginia Union in Richmond, Virginia, I had the opportunity to be pastored by the Reverend Linda Stevens, who had a church plant here, and there were a few hundred members, and I got to learn what it is to put in that initial work in a place, and had my first opportunity to be on paid staff somewhere while I was in seminary. So thank God for seminary, and I encourage the seminarians who are watching to take advantage of this season and this time. So I got to learn so much being right next to Pastor Linda Stevens. I was her youth pastor, but she utilized me in ways that our associate pastor at the time, our executive pastor at the time, were also being utilized. So I got to learn a lot. And then after seminary was over, I got married. We moved to Texas. I spent a year as a chaplain at Houston Methodist Hospital in the CPE residency. I'm sure I'll talk about that later in our conversation. But all of that leads towards my last assignment, which was at Wheeler Avenue. I spent a year as the chaplain and also served at a church in the country, Texas City, Texas. And their former youth pastor at Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church at the time, the pastor there was Reverend Andrew Berry, who gave me an opportunity to come in as an intern. Then he brought me in on his staff. And then when we were not able to work out a way for me to come on full time, I needed somewhere else to work after my residency was over. He made the initial connection with Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church, which was also a process and a journey to become a part of the staff. But I had the opportunity to serve at Wheeler Avenue from 2013 until April 2020. And my first Sunday here at 31st Street Baptist Church was actually Resurrection Sunday. So we had already shut down my first day here at the church. So it has been an incredible journey. I think you asked about the application process or the candidacy process.
Talk us through the components. I know
Okay.
the pastors across the nation, and I think this is changing, but one of the things that all of us talk about is that when we were in seminary, nobody walked us through the application process.
Right.
So just talk to us about the components of the application. What should people expect? And then I want Dr. Credit to jump on in there and tell us about the do's and the don'ts of the application process.
Okay, absolutely. So let me contextualize this. I am a Baptist minister. I've only served in Baptist churches or non-denominational churches that were really Baptist in their constitution. So I can only speak for the processes in the Baptist church. I know it's different from my Methodist brothers and sisters and from various different denominations. But from the Baptist process, what you can expect, and I've been a part of a few, normally there is an initial submission of a resume and a letter of intent. Some initial screening process that lets them know whether or not it's even worth going through the process of looking at your application. So having a resume, having a CV, and having a letter of intent to say why you want to be considered as a pastoral candidate is important, because that has been required from all of the processes that I've been a part of. After that, there may be a longer application that you have to submit, or there may be questions. It just depends on who the church is and what they're looking for. In the process here, there was an application like a job application that I had to submit, but there was also a portion, a separate questionnaire that sort of got to the core of some of my core beliefs, my core competencies. So initial almost screening pre-interview question kind of, and those are sometimes massive documents. I think one that I submitted was about 18 pages of responses for that. So there's normally some sort of questionnaire to kind of get a sense of who you are and what your beliefs are that goes along with the application. Then for me, there have been phone screenings to follow that, just to see if you are, if you will be considered for the round where they actually bring people in for an in-person interview that may be different in Corona pandemic times. But then there is the actual in-person interview. Sometimes people will do a candidate weekend and you get interviewed at the same time, where you also are introduced to the congregation that you are applying for. In my case, we decided to do it that way because we sort of had a really good phone interview process. And so for 31st Street Baptist Church, the next step for me was a candidate weekend. I came out to Richmond. I taught Bible study. I had meetings with all of the officers, the deacons, the trustees. I met with the ministers. I met with the ministry leaders that weekend. And we also had an opportunity to lead some sort of leadership development piece. There was an actual formal interview with the search committee, which lasted a few hours, and then had to wake up Sunday morning and preach. And after that, there's the waiting, which is maybe the best part of that. It's the waiting process to find out whether or not you're going to be considered for a vote for the congregation, and then a vote from the congregation. So that's sort of what my process was like.
So it's important to mention tonight we're kind of focusing on those who actually have to apply to a church. Our brothers and sisters who are Methodist, United Methodist, AME Zion, AME, many of those denominations are often appointed by a bishop or some type of supervisor of that parish. But Dr. Credit, add some color to our conversation and kind of walk us through the unofficial do's and the unofficial don'ts that come with applying. And Dr. Mitchell, come on and jump back in here too if your heart so desires.
Yeah, so what I would say actually it applies to any pastoral context, whether you are placed, sent, or actually apply. Pastor Mitchell already said so many great things. I certainly don't want to be redundant, but some of the do's and don'ts really is about oneself. One of the things I will say is whether you are applying, whether you are in a denomination that places you, the point is that at some point you're already thinking or desiring to pastor. So we would agree with that. And with that being said, one of the first things I would suggest to anyone, and I do suggest to those who are in the process, is to clean up your social media. I know it sounds cool. We are in, especially for millennials, we are in this day where we kind of think we can just say whatever we want to say. People are watching everywhere, and they're not just looking for 2 months prior. If you are, I want you to consider the church that you're applying for, you're interested in. They have to be able to look at you and say, what can I see this person like as my spiritual leader, as my pastor? And so the first thing I would say is to really what to do is to start cleaning up your social media. You want to present yourself as mature. You can be, I say to people all the time, once you are, well, we never arrive, but just allow me to say it this way. Once you arrive to certain places in your reputation and your respect, there's some things you can do in a more leisure, at your leisure. But you can't take that for granted when you have not been where you're trying to go. And so your social media will be a big indicator for how people will look at you or consider you in the process. In the actual interview process, this is something that a lot of people do. Churches, because I don't know, some of them try to trip you up. Some just don't know any better. Some are just copying the same questions during the interviewing process. But they love to ask the question, what vision, while you're actually interviewing, what vision do you have, brother pastor, sister pastor? What vision do you have for the church? Mm-hmm. Let me tell you something. Never, ever, I don't care if you do have a vision. I don't care if you've been there several times to preach. I don't care if you're very familiar with the geographical location, the landscaping, and you have all of these grand ideas. Whenever you are interviewing, never tell the people that you have a vision for the church, because first of all, you haven't even gotten there yet. You don't know those people, okay? All you know is that they are saved, you hope, keeping it real. And so never answer the question. The best way to answer it is to say, I do not have a vision for the church yet because I do not know you yet. As I come in and I get to know the people, the spirit, the culture, it is then that I believe God, along with what I learned from you and our relationship together, God will begin to formulate the vision as we go forward. The last thing I would say is in the interviewing process is be honest. Be honest. I know you want to put your first foot forward. Um, this was mentioned, of course, to prepare your resume, but I want to say that you need to start working on that like ASAP, because you don't know when someone's going to ask you for your resume. I can honestly say I have never initiated applying for any church. When my church called me, I was already a candidate at 2 other churches, but they all sought me. I preached for them and they sought me as their senior pastor. And so that may be some of your experiences where people will ask you to apply, but you can't walk around like they asked you for a resume by Friday and now you're running around because you don't have one together. You need to start working on a ministry resume now, okay? And in your ministry resume, it should not be like a job application, and it could have some elements, in my opinion, of a CV, but more so, it's a ministry resume. You need to be able to show how you can effectively lead a church, the experiences that you've had, and your knowledge about ministry and pastoring in itself beyond just preaching or teaching, and even your education. All right. And so the last part, as I was saying, is also be honest, be very honest. I have all of the pastors that I've had the pleasure of leading in the process that, and all of them got called to their churches. I told them all this: be honest. I have a friend who was going through a divorce at the time, and he said to me, Kim, I don't know, I love this church. I want this church. I was like, the church is yours. That's without a doubt. But he was apprehensive about talking about his divorce. I said, you go in there to the entire committee, to the deacon board, and you tell them the truth now, because you know what? When you're honest, listen, if this is where God would have you, you don't have to do any fanfare. Of course, you put your best foot forward, but it's best to be real. If you're having marital problems, I'm not saying that you have to divulge everything, but you need to share as much as you can, and you need to be honest. And it will help you along the way. It really, really will. And people will admire it. They really will.
That's some good feedback for us, Dr. Credit, especially on that vision piece. You reminded me of something that one of my professors in seminary, Dr. Cleo LaRue at Princeton, taught us about the vision piece. He said that when you get called to a church, they call you to become the pastor, not to be the pastor. They call you to become the pastor. And it's only through the relationships that you make in your time at that church over time, and you get to know the intricacies and the who's who and what that church is care about and what God's vision is for that church, that a vision is birthed out of that. Dr. Mitchell, if an individual is called for a church, maybe they've got 2 opportunities. We've all seen people, you and I, Dr. Credit, I'm sure Dr. Credit has trained Doctor of Ministry students at New Brunswick Theological Seminary and at Payne Theological Seminary. You and I have seen folks come and go at churches. And one of the things that we often know is sometimes it's just not a good fit. Talk to us about discerning and how to decide whether or not a space is a good fit for you.
That's a fantastic question, bro. I reacted the way I did because at the time I was called the 31st Street Baptist Church. I was also a candidate for another church. Was actually asked to be a finalist. We're going to call it Church B, and that was a very real dilemma for me.
You did there.
We're gonna call it Church B, and that was a very real dilemma for me. I still believe that God calls pastors, and so I believe that ultimately, if we're listening, we'll end up where God has called us to be. And we won't just hear that, but the congregation will hear that. I'm gonna come back around to that. I think we have to, and I tell brothers and sisters who have reached out to me since I've started about their own processes, not to trust the carrots. I think that sometimes what we are looking at can distract us. With Church B, I had the opportunity to be a finalist for a church that would have doubled the current salary I have, that maybe would have had a bigger platform for me and all that. But as soon as I walked into worship at 31st Street Baptist Church, I knew it. I knew this was where I was supposed to be. When I walked into worship, I walked up to the pulpit and I was in tears, man, because the Spirit told me, this is it. This is it. I hadn't even seen Church B yet. Didn't know where I was in that process yet. Hadn't been given the information that I would later get that I was their candidate at Church B. But as soon as I walked into 31st Street and worship with the congregation, I knew. And we have to trust what the Spirit is telling us, and not the dangling carrot that is in front of us. I think I've had opportunities, by the grace of God, I've had opportunities to be considered at several different places by recommendation. Most of mine are by recommendation. Like Dr. Credit, I haven't applied to anywhere that someone did not ask me to, or somebody did not recommend me to. And I think that you have to know and discern and be discerning what the Lord is speaking to you. How does God speak to you? And also, you have to be aware of what's important to you. So in Church B, legacy and financial stability and all of that. But what I felt as soon as I came to 31st Street was family. That's important for me because I've got an 18-month-old. I've got a wife, and my family is also here in the DMV area. So I knew that was important. So I think having a sense of discernment about what's important to you personally, having a sense for hearing the call of God and knowing God's voice. And in my situation, I was asked to be a finalist for Church B 4 days before the vote at 31st Street Baptist Church. And in fact, they asked me at Church B, they flew me out to this undisclosed place. We had our interview. They asked me would I consider waiting a few weeks so that I could fly back and do a candidate weekend there. And 4 days later, 31st Street extended the call. And I wrestled with it, man. I wrestled with it. And I remember calling a few people that I trust, but one in particular was Dr. William Houston Curtis. And he gave me some of the best advice. He said, man, don't pass by an open door waiting for the potential of another. Don't walk past an open door that God, if you believe God calls pastors, if you believe that God called you there, if you're telling me when you walked in, you broke down in tears because you knew, don't walk past this open door because you think there may be more prestige, more pay, more exposure somewhere else. Because what I've seen, at least in Baptist context, is that thing will flip on you, right? Go where you hear the word of the Lord calling you to go, and trust that God will take care of you. And that has been what I've tried to do in this season, trusting that God will take care of it. And God has, man. Even in the midst of pandemic, God has. So that's what I would offer there.
I want to leave some time so that we can get some student questions in here. And I want to get a few student questions in our conversation tonight. But could either of you just kind of explore, when you get to the church, what do you do and what don't do you do? Walk us through your first, I almost want to say first 100 days, but your first 6 months, your first year. Many of us were told, don't make any changes in the first year. I'm not sure that that's true or false. I don't know. But what do you do when you get there?
I'll jump in on this, and this is not a shameless plug because it's true. But just 2 months ago, I published a book called 13 Crucial Lessons for the New Pastor, particularly for pastors who are people who are seeking to become a senior pastor, those who are passing under 5 years, or those who are going into a new ministry assignment. It applies to leadership in many ways, but particularly to the pastorate. And in chapter 3 is titled "Do Your Research." I cannot tell you how important that is. It means that you go into the church, the first thing you should be doing is doing your research. You are walking into a history, you are walking into a culture, you are walking into a context and a community that you don't know anything about. And particularly during the candidacy process, the main people that you're going to have contact with is the deacons, particularly in the Baptist church, or certain elders. Before you get to the pulpit committee, they will likely share a lot of different little things with you. But whoever you're in contact with, those key people will be giving you feedback, and they will be sharing from where they're sharing from. But that does not mean that it's an accurate picture of that church, okay? And so you have to do your research. You have to be quiet. You have to pray. You have to fast. You have to be discerning. And you cannot dare think that you are smart enough to come into a church, an established culture of people, and know them. Okay. And so one of the things I also share, and this is really kind of unheard of, but it worked. It worked so well for me in terms of being able to transition a very traditional Baptist church, 100-year-old Baptist church, um, so fast. I was able to do things in my first year that, again, is unheard of. And even in these 5 years. But it came because what I did was, when I first got there, I opened up the door on Wednesdays and Sundays, and I think it may have been another day, but for 15, 20-minute increments, where I invited all the leaders and all of the congregation to come and just sit with me. And here were the rules. I did not ask them anything. I simply let them come in and talk. And when I tell you, after 100 or whoever, because everybody's not going to come, came in during those months and just shared with me, I got a clear understanding of who the people were, because you keep hearing reoccurring stories and complaints, and and different things. So that's what you focus on. You don't really focus on any changes. I also state in my book, those first 100 days, I really say the first 6 months, you need to preach sermons that you've already preached, so that you could focus on getting to know the people, the culture, and just administratively, or everything that you need to do, the community. You want to have time for that. And if you are simply, at this point, you've been elected to the church, so you don't have to try to flip them over the benches with your preaching every week. They love your preaching because they just voted you in as a pastor, so you're cool with that. And if you're not experienced with preaching, you probably wouldn't have gotten to this far. And so, with that being said, take the first, if you're not comfortable with the whole six, and definitely the first three, those first 100 days, preach sermons that you have already preached, and focus on the people. You got to get to know the people, and you got to get to know the history, because that is going to make or break your pastorate and your relationship going forward.
I wanna jump in. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right before you go, I'm gonna ask Dr. Mitchell to give his response. But if you have questions, could you use the participant feature, I believe it is, and use the wave your hand feature, so that we can begin preparing for questions. Dr. Mitchell.
So I wanna jump in and talk about two things: the importance of asking questions, and sometimes that is not just of your context, but also of wise leaders who have done the work, right? Dr. Credit mentioned her book. This is one of the ways I ask questions. I saw that Dr. Credit wrote a book about the beginning of your pastoral journey. In Richmond, Dr. Anthony Chandler wrote a book about the beginning of his pastoral journey. So I picked them up, and I don't have to call. I can glean from these 13 lessons that Dr. Credit talks about in her book, the lessons I got from Dr. Chandler and from others who have done the work. Now, I will say that my first 100 days was unique. And so I want to acknowledge that I haven't been able to do all of the things that I was advised to do coming in. My story is that I was called on March the 2nd, 2020, to come and to pastor the church, and that the last worship experience prior to pandemic was March the 16th. And so our church is we have an older demographic. As I look through our records, the average age is somewhere between 60 and 70 years old. And we didn't have a whole lot in place to prepare for the pandemic. We didn't have a website. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have online giving. So my first 100 days was survival mode. And I think under normal circumstances, my attitude would have been not to touch anything, but we were we've got to get some things done to be able to survive in the pandemic. So my first 100 days was dedicated to creating our digital footprint and making sure we had ways for people to connect with the church, to support the church, right? To be able to support the church while we were away from the building. So before I even got here, my first official day was Resurrection Sunday, but I was called on the 2nd. There was a meeting on the 9th about what could potentially happen with this pandemic, because I was in Houston. I already saw it coming. Before it hit Virginia, I saw it coming. So I was working while I was still at Wheeler, trying to prepare us, trying to get our Facebook going. We later did the website, but trying to get our YouTube up, trying to switch over to Givelify and online giving so that we had a way to sustain while we were in the pandemic. And strangely enough, I got two different points of view on the preaching as well. There were those like Dr. Credit who advised to preach what was old. What I found when I arrived was none of my old sermons fit the moment. None of them were, even when I try to go back to get some of them, they are not, they have not been easy for me to even rework for each and every week. When I started, something else was happening, whether it was pandemic, whether it was George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, something was going on where God was saying, you have to do this. And so my experience was unique in that I have written every week since we've started, and that was not the plan. That was not the plan. I had stuff. I was ready. But there's something about the context, what was happening in the world, that forced me to do really pastoral preaching in the midst of pandemic to a people who I still have not completely met, and had to shift even my own expectations around what it looked like to meet the congregation. We were supposed to have a reception. I was supposed to see them and have chicken and macaroni my first Sunday. And it was not until almost a month ago where we actually saw people outside of our tech crew in the sanctuary. I had to learn them through the comment section. Isn't that crazy? I had to learn them through the comment section and the way that they responded and interacted in Bible study and on sermonic pieces in the comment section, but also spending the time to get to know the elders. So I'd say ask questions, because you may end up in a situation where you don't have the luxury of waiting. There may be some things that you have to do. We had to build a website. We had to get on Facebook. We had to get on YouTube. We had to find Zoom. We had to find a phone line because folks don't have computers. We had to find all these things pretty early. So there were things we had to change. There were things that we could change. Brother Kevin mentioned my logo. That was not the intention to start the logo. I would not have touched the church's logo. What we found when I got here was nobody had the original copy. So when we were trying to build the website and build the Facebook, I didn't have anything to use. So it just so happened that it helped. And I will say, for brothers and sisters who are starting in the midst of the pandemic, it is potentially an opportunity. Now, it is hard work, but you may find there's opportunities in the pandemic to do some things that may have taken a year, 2, 3. There's some decisions that I had not planned in my plan, talking about the interview, right? In my plan, what we were going to do, that we had to do in the first month, that I'm sure would have taken us a year or 2 because we had to survive. So I could talk about that all the time. I will say too, in terms of the preaching series, is your friend. If you end up having to to work in pandemic, series helped me because I was not looking for a text. I think what Dr. Credit is speaking to is the time it takes to find your text and to research another text. What we were doing, we walked through the book of Acts. We walked through the end of Matthew. I started on Resurrection Sunday and we walked through the end of that book for 4 weeks. And then we jumped to Acts, right? So I wasn't looking for a text that helped me. And it just so happened that the Lord directed in such a way that they hit on what was happening in the world that week. So trust God, trust your preparation, listen to the voice of God. And I'm done with that.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. This is so important, and it was so important that we have you speak tonight, because the church, as we knew it 8 months ago in February, does not exist. So now you have an expertise that pastors who've been pastoring for 25 years don't have, because many people do not know what it is like to start at a church as a senior pastor in the middle of the pandemic. Not only are we in the middle of a pandemic, but the church may never go back to the way it once was. It will not. I can say that without fear of successful contradiction. I don't think we will go back to the way we were. We'll be better on the other side of this, and it'll be different. But you have such expertise for tonight. Our dean, I believe, has a question. I believe she is unmuted. So Dean, if you want to jump in here.
Thank you so much. I know we'll need to wrap it up, but I wanted the opportunity to ask a question because both of you walked into established ministries, churches that were already there, churches that have a long-standing history. In a few weeks, we're going to be talking to some folks who have planted churches and are dealing with those first few years. But you all walked into already established congregations. So this is the question. The question is, you certainly probably had supporters who loved you, embraced you, happy to see you there, but you probably had some distractors as well. And so how do you deal in those first few years, not with the supporters and the people who are like, yes, we're so glad you're here, brand new pastor, we've been waiting for you, but the people who are either giving you the side eye, the people who may have been skeptical about your ministry or about your candidacy? What do you do when you walk into an already established place and you are the stranger? They have to get to know you, and they may not have been a supporter of you coming into that place.
Well, that's very real. I mentioned earlier that I got voted in, elected with over 95% of the vote, but that doesn't mean 100%. And so there's that remnant, okay? What I found interesting is I did get in with that, that high number of vote, very close to 100%. Yet I still had leaders who outright told me they did not believe in, women being pastors. I'm like, that's interesting. How's this going to work? And so, and just other people, and men and women, who did not believe, or I was not their choice. And so, that speaks to just being very watchful, very discerning. You have to obviously love people, and serve them at the same level, but you have to watch people like that who are not in love with you, because they will set up traps. They will set up traps. Another thing is that some of the people who are your biggest opponents at the beginning, come year 4 or 5, end up changing and becoming your biggest supporter, while your supporters become your people who betrayed you. And that's very hurtful. I talk about that in chapter 6 of my book. It is something that we all will go through. And so I think it's about the people factor. Although they're not in love with you, they may try to set traps up for you because you're not their chosen. You just got to continue to walk in integrity and treat all people the same, because people do change. And some of your greatest supporters, the minute you make a decision they don't like, the minute they cannot be at your right side, the minute they don't get the position that you have the authority to put them in, they can become worse than the ones who openly don't like you but won't try to harm you. And so all people have to be watched, and just don't make it about them, make it about you, being a star example of what a leader is, um, and one who will love and serve all people.
Thank you, Dr. Credit. As Dr. Credit was talking, I was thinking about the vote here. I don't remember the exact percentage, but I do remember it was 12 folks that didn't vote for me. That's what I do remember. There were 200 and some who did, but there are 12 that didn't. And there are some words that guide me in dealing with them, and detractors, as Dr. Pierce said. One is I pray for them, and I don't mean to be funny, but I learned in some of my previous assignments, it is really difficult to hate folks that you actively pray for, right? And so even in the short time, there have been instances where I didn't like certain interactions. I didn't like certain energy. I could sense some detractorism in there. But when I go to the track in the morning, I call their names in prayer, and I do it over and over again. And it is difficult to hold on to that, because that Baltimore in you jump up, but it's hard to hold on to that when every day I'm praying about the well-being of your family. Every day I'm praying about, your health and specific things. So praying is one. I'm also learning not to take things personal. Um, and that was one of the most freeing revelations for me, Dr. Pierce, because I realized I hadn't been here long enough for it to be about me. Does that make sense? In that there's some things that I am facing. My face happens to be on it, but this isn't really about me. And learning to listen and try to get to what the core issue is has been helpful for me. When I realized, literally, we haven't had folk in the building, it's no way you are actually upset with me in some of these instances. And listening to kind of hear what is the core issue, that has helped me tremendously. And then finally, I would say just trying to, I think to Dr. Credit's point, be even, walk with integrity, not show preference to those who are very generous and very helpful in this season, because I don't want to play favorites. And I'm grateful for the love in this season, but that may flip. And so I want to be down the line, not showing preference with the folks who I'm dealing with, and also making sure I'm careful about the precedents that I set. That when I make decisions, I have to think through, what is this going to look like when someone else comes with this request? What is the precedent that I'm setting? And that sort of helps me to deal with some of the negative energy that could come when I'm thinking long-term about the precedents that I set and not showing preference and favoritism to others.
Thank you both so much. Those were incredible answers, entirely useful for whatever realm of ministry to which all of our students are called. Many of us, all of us, as people of faith are called. I just want to extend my gratitude to the two of you for being so transparent and so honest. These are the things that you learn sometimes through experience, but other times we have the wisdom where we can call on other people and they can help us avoid some of the pitfalls, and they can help us to think through some of the decisions that we have to make. And so we are so thankful to the two of you for being our first and being willing to be our first for our first 5 years series. We are very grateful to you. And Reverend Peterman, thank you so much for moderating this panel, and for all of you who were a part of this conversation. I simply want to say to beloved community that we are here every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. You know the time, you know the place, you know the Zoom, and we are here. We thank you for being present with us as we think through, like I said, issues of praxis, how we are applying all of we're doing and all that we're learning in theological education to this experience of doing ministry. And this series will continue to help us share. I'd like to have us close out with a word of prayer, as promised, to get you out here on time. And so please pray with me. God, we are just so grateful for the wisdom and the knowledge and the information that was shared tonight. We are so thankful that there are still people who are answering your call to preach, to teach, to pastor, to lead, to serve, to be with others through this journey that we call life. God, we thank you because there's so much each of us still need to learn as we face our first 5 years or our first 50 years of this journey in our ministry vocation. Teach us, oh God, that if you have called us, you will certainly equip us. Help us to be bold and courageous in the work that you have given us. We thank you for this community. We thank you for our guests. Bless their families, bless their ministries, bless the work of their hands. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Thank you, beloved community.
Amen.
Thank you to our guests. We are so happy that you are here. By my clock is 6:30. We're leaving you right on time. We can stick around, but we want to thank so much Dr. Kimberly Credit and Dr. Joshua Mitchell. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being a part of the HUSD beloved community for our first 5 years series. God bless you.